Whether you love the regular 3x3 Rubik's Cube or not, I'm sure you'll have different opinions on the less common 3x3 variants. Some of them are easier to solve, while others may take days to learn, and of course some of them are just really cool to look at. So to figure out which 3x3s are really the best of them all, I made a tier list that ranks the 3x3s in my collection. Of course, this list is just based on my opinion, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start with the one that started it all, the regular 3x3. I'm going to put it on the S tier just because it's a classic. Without this cube, we won't have all the other twisty puzzles that we know and love today. Next up is the Rubik's Impossible. I think this is a great idea and I would put it on the S tier if only I didn't have an actual headache while trying to solve this. I wish there was a way to implement the same complexity on the cube without hurting my head, but that's just me, so in the A tier it goes. Then we have the Fisher Cube. This was one of my first shape mods and it's a pretty straightforward mod, at least relative to the crazier cuts we see in other puzzles. But I think this is a pretty cool mod because it adds a layer of complexity that isn't too intimidating for shape mod newbies, so I'll drop it on the A tier. Our next one is the Windmill Cube, which is similar to the Fisher Cube, so in the A tier it goes too. Now the next two puzzles are the Windmill Wall Cube and Walled Fisher Windmill Cube, which are mods of the previous two mods. They're good puzzles, but as they are just slight tweaks from the original mods, I will be putting them on the B tier. Next up, the Void Cube. Cool puzzle, slight difference from the original 3x3, pretty interesting aesthetically. A tier. Now we have the Clover Cube, which is pretty much a Void Cube, just with different shapes. I'm putting this on the C tier, mostly because it has low points for ease of use. I personally don't like puzzles where your fingers can get stuck while solving the cube. And then we have the DNA Cube. If we're talking aesthetics, this is pretty cool, but in terms of what it offers the solver, it's not really top tier, so into the B tier it goes. So now we have something that's not even close to a cube anymore, the 3x3x3 dodecahedron. Plus points for the shape and plus points for it not being too obvious as a 3x3 mod. Still not a classic, so I'll just drop it in the A tier. Then we have another unconventional shape in the Green Hills octahedron. I'd put it on the same level as the dodecahedron earlier, but the shape of this puzzle isn't too interesting, and it's pretty easy to see how this is a 3x3, so B tier. And now this is where a lot will probably disagree with me, the Master Morphix, D tier. I don't like how this puzzle is wobbly. I prefer a more stable Pyraminx-like shape. And I'm not sure, but maybe the curvy design helps with the movements of the puzzle. In any case, clearly this is not one of my favorites. Okay, now we'll deal with 3 puzzles in one go, the Finger Hop Cubes. These are relatively new puzzles and they're pretty interesting. I got them because they do look good and they're relaxing puzzles if you just need something to solve absent-mindedly. But at the end of the day, they don't carry that much value as a 3x3 mod in terms of the solve. So into the C tier they go. Then we have a crazier shape in the form of the tetrachydecahedron Magic Diamond UFO Puzzle Cube. If we're ranking names, this would be in the F tier. As a puzzle though, this is really fun. This introduces different shapes instead of the regular cubies, but to be fair, a quick tilt can easily show you how this is just a 3x3. B tier for this one, as well as the similar puzzle, the Shining Diamond, which extends some of the pieces into a pointy end. Right next to these puzzles are the ones in the same family of shapes. the 3x3x3 hexagonal dipyramid, and the tetrapyramid. I think they should all fall in the B tier, where we have the interesting but could be better puzzles. And now we have our first F tier addition, the 3x3x3 centrosphere. It's very hard to use this puzzle. Moving the middle layers requires flicking some tabs that were added to the edges, and moving the outer faces can trap your fingers in the gaps between the edges and the extended corners. It doesn't even really add anything to the solve. It's just a regular 3x3 in essence. So, if you like the centrosphere, feel free to leave a comment to change my mind. Moving on to Fisher's Cylinder Cube. This one is another low-tier puzzle for me. I don't really know what it is about this puzzle, but for me it feels a bit too simplistic compared to the other mods. The two circular faces are just regular 3x3 faces, and while the centers of the middle layer have to be oriented, adding some complexity to the solve, that mechanic just ends up being a nuisance because it's a very slight difference when one of the centers is off. And back to the A tier we go with the Bump Cube. This one is a no-brainer for me. When most people think of a twisty puzzle, the first thing that comes to mind is the colors, and this one just doesn't have any. While the previous puzzles also introduce a shape factor into the solve, the Bump Cube relies only on the shape factor, making a first-time solver think differently even if they're used to the regular 3x3. And this puzzle spawned so many other bump puzzle variants, both with plain and different colors, so I'd put it with our beloved classic 3x3. Speaking of Bump Cube spawns, here's one, the Wind Mirror Cube. There are way more 3x3 bump puzzles, but I'm only including the ones I have in my collection so that I have actual experience in solving these puzzles. B tier for this one, interesting but not outstanding. Next is the 3x3x3 trigonal trapezohedron, which is a huge puzzle. The cuts in this puzzle are very interesting, and it kind of forces you to consider different angles when you move around the pieces. But in terms of ease of use, this one's really bad. Because I'm not a shape modder, I don't know how the same cuts can be used on a puzzle that is maybe a bit smaller or a bit easier to handle, but with its current state, it's an E tier puzzle for me. Same goes for the Hex Prism one. Cool idea, interesting cuts, but my hands get tired with just one solve. Then we have the Beveling Axis Cube and the Axis Cube. I'm putting both on the A tier because I just love how these puzzles cuts are way off what you would expect from a puzzle that solves into a cube. The Beveling Axis Cube is actually one of my personal favorites because I love the contrast between the really big and the really small pieces in the puzzle. Next up is another personal favorite, the Penrose Cube. This is a pretty straightforward idea, and one can argue that this is too close to the original regular 3x3 cube. But what I like about this one is it opens up the possibility of designs that move from one face to another. The solve is pretty great too. To experienced solvers, this seems too easy, but for a first-timer who's used to the original puzzle, the Penrose Cube needs some quick thinking. Nothing too intimidating in the added complexity, but it's a pretty satisfying solve. A tier. And then we have the Pandora Cube. This is another puzzle that just hurts to solve, and I learned that if you solve this a lot of times, you can kind of get used to where you should put your fingers to avoid getting hurt, but still minus points for that. The cuts are still pretty cool though, so C tier it is. Our next puzzle is the Case Cube, which is probably my top favorite cube in this whole list. I just love that there are too many extra pieces here that make it look like it's not a 3x3, and I love that it's a manageable shape while it's still not a perfect cube. A tier for me. Lastly, we have the fluffy cube, and please do let me know if I'm just not seeing something here, but I don't get how this is more interesting than just a regular cube. I'm putting it on the D tier just because solving it is an okay experience compared to the ones in the lower tier. So there you have it, all the 3x3s in my collection ranked in a tier list. What are your thoughts on this list, and what category of puzzles do you think I should rank next? Drop your comments below and check out this video on your screen right now.